Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Cave Regions of the Ozarks and Black Hills by Luella Agnes Owen, published in 1898. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 3, Episode 44. Content note: if by some chance you feel inspired to investigate any locations mentioned, please keep in mind that they may not be currently accessible to the public. Some are operated as commercial caves and have been noted as such where appropriate. This book was written quite some time ago and therefore does not necessarily reflect current-day outlooks and language choices. The scientific texts may use outdated terminology or be inaccurate in light of more recent discoveries. This podcast was created primarily to help you relax and to entertain you. The texts are chosen for their ability to charm and interest you, rather than for educational purposes. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on iTunes, it would help other listeners find us. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 10, Wind Cave Continued. The Fairgrounds Route, written at the author's request by Mr. E. L. MacDonald. At 9:30 in the morning, the train bringing health seekers and tourists arrives at Hot Springs, a beautiful little city nestled in the southernmost foothills of the world-reputed Black Hills of South Dakota. The choice of a hotel is soon made, and when located, the newcomers observe the other guests and acquaint themselves with the attractions of the resort. Probably during the day they are approached by the solicitor of the wonderful Wind Cave, who explains that the best way to reach the cave is by means of the coach and four seen at the hotel in the morning, and arrangements are made for the following day. The next morning, seated in the tally-ho coach with strangers who are soon acquaintances, you start on a beautiful 12-mile drive to one of nature's most interesting sights. Immediately after leaving town, you begin to admire the scenery and enjoy the cool, refreshing breezes wafted from the mountains to the north down the slopes to the arid plains. After climbing a gently sloping hogback for about 8 miles, you are at the top of the divide and 1,000 feet higher than Hot Springs, which may be seen on the left. Looking ahead, you can see Harney Peak, the highest mountain in the Black Hills district, and on the right you see Buffalo Gap, through which the creek runs that heads at Minnepajuta Springs. The Native Americans used to drive buffalo through this gap, hence its name. A small but thriving little town to the eastward takes its name from this Buffalo Gap. From here, you begin to go down a gentle and winding incline to the cave, which is reached all too soon. At the office, you register and procure tickets, and then have from 1/2 to 3/4 of an hour in which to eat lunch or dine at the hotel. Then all congregate in the office, from whence the start is made, after every one has put on a cave cap. Not a suit, as such, is entirely unnecessary. The guide leads the way to the entrance of the cave, which is separated from the office by some little distance, and is located in the bed of a long since dry run, which in former times has bared the carboniferous strata, and within this kind of rock the cave is found. As the author has asked me for an article descriptive of the cave, I will only attempt to say something of our medium-length route to the fairgrounds, or in other words, the fairgrounds route. A collective description of the whole cave would take months, even years, to complete. Besides, the above route is the one most used by visitors at the present time. On entering the cave house, a log structure, you will, in all probability, ask from whence comes the murmur of a waterfall. The guide answers that it is the rushing current of air at the mouth of the cave, sometimes in and sometimes out. Professor J. E. Todd, in Bulletin No. 1, South Dakota Geological Survey, page 48, says, quote, "This phenomenon is found to correspond with the varying pressure of the barometer, and with its single opening and capacious chambers is easily accounted for." End quote. The rushing air is sometimes strong enough to require a man's weight to open the entrance door. 5 days and nights is the longest time the wind has been known to move in one direction without ceasing. This is one of nature's greatest atmospherical phenomena. Someone says, "Tickets, please," and into the hole we go, single file down a lighted passageway to where we can light our candles. After descending about 155 feet, we come into the bridal chamber, named by some of the earlier explorers before the present management took hold of the property, which is 8 or 10 feet in length by 20 feet in breadth. Passing along some distance, the snowball room is entered. It carries this name on account of little rosettes of carbonate of lime sticking to the irregular ceiling. This room is pretty narrow and some 50 feet in length. The post office is next, and soon reached. The ceiling is covered with the boxwork formation somewhat resembling post office boxes. You will no doubt wonder why it carries such a common name. Just because, after searching in what books on geology and other sciences we could get, we could not find it described, nor any formation resembling it. Hence its common name, as we have named the popcorn work, frostwork, etc., from their appearance. The dimensions of the post office are some 80 feet in length by 20 feet in width, with an average ceiling height of probably 12 feet. Red Hall is the room next in order, and has on either side a red bank of sandy micaceous clay. Just to the left is a very pretty little grotto of boxwork. This room is very odd in make-up. The floor is very rough, and dips about 15 feet in its length of 60 feet, and includes a short flight of stairs. The lowest end of the room is prettily decorated, and some pleasing blends of color attract the eye. To the left is the Old Maid's Grotto, a pretty little nook that would please any maid, old or young. After passing through the White Room, we turn to the left along the crevice, and after traveling some little distance reach the Grand Opera, a very narrow room, but some 40 feet in length. Chopin's Nocturne is a small grotto in the right-hand wall, named by the famous violinist Edouard Remengy. The Devil's Lookout is reached by a few steps. It is a crevice about 10 feet wide at the base and 65 feet in height. The place is remarkable for its columns of rock just overhead. The pathway leads to Milton's study, some 50 feet distant. Turning into the crevice again, some 20 feet are traveled when attention is called to Seal Rocks. Samson's Palace is the next room in order. Here we see some stalagmitic water formation on the left wall, and the ceiling is one of the most beautiful yet seen on the trip. We pass along to Swiss Scenery, a very prettily decorated room, 50 feet in length by 15 in height. The boxwork is very pretty, shading from yellow to dark brown. The general appearance of the room would suggest its name, it being rougher than any other in the immediate vicinity. Passing under an arch, we enter the Queen's drawing room. Here the boxwork has been developed beyond any on our pathway thus far. From the ceiling it hangs like draperies, and on the left wall is about 24 inches in depth. On the whole, this room is elegant enough for the most exacting queen. We step from this room into the M.E. Church. Reverend Mr. Hansher, president of the Black Hills Methodist College, was, I believe, the first to hold song and prayer service in this room. The pulpit is on the left as you pass through. The guides always ask if any wish to sing or worship, as anyone has a perfect right in a dedicated chapel. The Giant's Causeway is only a few steps beyond. This bit of scenery has some resemblance to the famed basalt attraction on the coast of Ireland. We duck our heads under the Arch of Politeness and rise to a standing position in Lena's Arbor, a very irregular-shaped room admired by a great many of our visitors. We enter Capitol Hall at the side, about midway between the ends. It is the largest room yet visited, being some 200 feet from end to end, with a very high ceiling. Here we notice the walls and ceiling are bare of boxwork and other formation, and are clean and white. The decorative appearance exceeds any room yet visited. After getting into line again, we go down a flight of stairs to Oddfellows Hall, a chamber that on examination suggests its name. In the ceiling is situated the all-seeing eye, one of the emblems of that august body, and at a little distance the 3 links, also in the ceiling, and just under the latter is situated a rock very much resembling a goat. Attention is called to the first appearance of popcorn work, a very peculiar formation resembling popcorn after it has broken open, and in this part of the cave it is quite plentiful. We now descend another flight of stairs into Turtle Pass, where a large turtle rests beside the path, and just beyond is the Confederate crossroads, where the fissure is crossed by another forming a cross with perfect right angles. The right-hand passage is used for specimens only. Straight ahead leads to the Garden of Eden, the end of our shortest route. We take the left-hand path and journey through Summer Avenue, some 70 feet in length, and reach the scenes of Wicklow, a large and high room, beautifully decorated with boxwork and popcorn. The ceiling and the left wall from floor to ceiling are fine boxwork. On the right you see dark space, as a very large portion of this room is unused, but we pass the Piper's Pig. List. The guide is pounding on the Salvation Army drum, a large projecting rock that, on being struck with a closed hand, gives a sound very much like a bass drum. After walking across a short plank, we enter Kimball's Music Hall, a very beautiful room settled between two crevices and lined with boxwork. Viewing the ceiling from the fissure on the right, it is seen to be smooth and fringed with popcorn. In some places the boxes are closed, resembling finished honeycomb. Overhead boxwork can be seen as high as the light penetrates. On the whole, I think this is the finest crevice in the explored cave. Looking straight ahead, you wonder how the party can travel over such a road as presents itself to view. But the guide turns into an arch in the right-hand wall and enters Whitney Avenue. After walking across the bridge over shadowy depths, our pathway lies for some 50 feet in one of the most interesting ovens in the cave, at the end of which we enter Monte Cristo's palace by going down a flight of stairs. This room has the greatest depth beneath the surface of any of the fairgrounds route, which is 450 feet. In this room is noticed a decided change in the boxwork, which is much heavier than any seen or that will be seen on this route, and the color is light blue. I guess I will give the party a talk while we rest under Monte Cristo's diamonds, a very sparkling cluster, about 6 inches in diameter, of silica crystals. After studying the cave, it appears that it did not form in the same manner as most others. On account of the absence of sinkholes, the regular arrangement of the chambers, the regular dip of the rock to the southeast from 5 to 10 degrees, and the regularity of the long vertical fissures running northwest-southeast. In fact, the whole cave is made up of these fissures, and it seems that the water has entered narrow crevices opened by some eruptive force. You see small holes eaten in the ceilings and walls in every direction, which indicates that the water came from a higher level and, being under great pressure, wanted passage out. It seems the cave was a reservoir for a long time. Then, after the water stopped flowing in, it slowly receded, and in settling the overcharged waters covered the rocks and specimens with a calcareous coating, very thin in the upper portions of the cave, and getting thicker the deeper you go, giving evidence, as you see, of slowly settling. Had the waters rushed out, they would in all probability have left the rocks uncoated as in all other caves, with one exception, the Crystal Cave, some 75 miles to the north of Wind Cave. As we have some more caves to see, we must journey on. Taking one last look at Monte Cristo's diamonds, we pass into Milliners Avenue, a very pretty avenue indeed, with nearly as many colors as a milliner's show window would present. About midway of this avenue, we cross the bridge over Castle Garden, a room in the 8th tier beneath the surface. From this avenue, we step into the assembly room. Here the formations are covered with a gypsum crystal that sparkles with wonderful brilliancy. On the right is a passage leading to the Masonic Temple, a room that any body of Masons would be proud of could they hold lodge meetings in it. The passage on the left is the terminus of the Pearly Gates route, the longest developed route in the cave. After moving along some distance, we see the Badlands and then come into the tennis court. This room has the net in the ceiling, and I suppose the party can furnish the racket. On the right-hand side of this room there is tier upon tier of boxwork. Looking to the left, you shudder at the almost bottomless pit just beside the pathway. Here we take a rest preparatory to climbing up to the marble quarry, a task of 2 flights of stairs. This is a very large room and has the most uneven floor, ceiling, and walls of any that our visitors see, and is barren of specimens, excepting in the first part over the stairs, where there is some boxwork of very pretty structure and color. Some distance up the path we see on one side the ghost of She, and on the other the Devil's Punch Bowl, a large rock with a basin-shaped hole about 36 inches across and 16 inches deep. But lo, the bottom has been broken out, which is very appropriate, as South Dakota is at present a prohibition state. A winding path is followed until attention is called to the sheep's head above an arch over the passage, and the ceiling here is of flint, the ledge of which is 4 inches thick. Passing under the arch, we enter Johnston's campground, so named because Paul Alexander Johnston camped in this room while accomplishing the 3rd of his greatest mind-reading feats, during which he remained in the cave 72 hours. He was locked in his room at the Evans Hotel while a committee secreted the head of a gold pin in the cave. On their return, after being blindfolded, he led them to the livery stable and, securing a team, drove to the cave and found the pin in the Standing Rock chamber beyond the pearly gates, and then drove back to the city, still blindfolded. Down one short flight of stairs, and we are in the waiting room, so called on account of persons waiting here while the rest of their party finished the trip by climbing up the Alpine Way. This difficult climb was made until the route was developed via the marble quarry. A steep pathway and 1 flight of stairs now bring us to the ticket office, and another short stairway leads into the room above, which is the fairgrounds. We enter the right wing, which measures 206 links in length and 49 in width at the narrowest place. We are now in the 3rd level, and no boxwork is seen, but the ceiling, which is low, shows many interesting fossils. The central dome is some 50 feet in height, and passing to the right, the guide seats the party in such a position that the frostwork on the wall can be seen to advantage. This is the largest part of the fairgrounds, and measures 645 links long, exclusive of the right wing, which has a width of 53 links, which, with a number of wings added, makes it one of the largest underground rooms within American caverns. A great many visitors look at their cuff buttons when told we have 2,500 rooms included in 97 miles of passageways. Of course, they do not understand how we get the mileage. In going to the fairgrounds, we travel about 3 miles. In each fissure there are 8 levels, which makes 24 miles of cave from the entrance to the fairgrounds. Of the formations in the cave, the different kinds are on different levels, the stalactites and stalagmites nearest the surface on the second, the frostwork on the third. This formation is in most instances as colorless as snow. The mode of its formation is not thoroughly understood, but is found in such positions as suggest its being formed by vapors overcharged as spoken of about the water. It is almost always on an overhanging rock, over or near some fissure leading to a deeper portion of the cave. Boxwork in this level is scattering and fragile. In the fourth, it is the prevailing formation. In the fifth, it is heavier and a little darker. In the sixth, it varies in style and color, and popcorn appears, a queer formation resembling popcorn ready to eat. It is not so purely white here as in the lower levels, 7th and 8th. In the 7th, the boxwork is heavier than any seen on the fairgrounds route, and the color is nearly blue, having a faded appearance. In this tier is also found a good deal of mineral wool, which must not be mistaken for asbestos. It sometimes attains a length of 18 inches, and at one place where it seems to come out of a hole 2 inches in diameter and drops down like a gray beard, we have named it Noah's beard. In the 8th tier we find very beautiful formations of carbonate of lime, and the boxwork is decidedly blue, the boxes larger, and their partitions 1/2 inch thick. We have been deeper than the 8th tier, but in narrow crevices barely admitting a man of average stature. In these, the calcareous coating is much thicker than in any higher portions of the cave, but very little sign of boxwork is seen. Sometimes we make a comparison between the cave and a sponge. Take, for instance, a sponge as large as an apple barrel, and there would be holes in it as big as a man's thumb and closed hand. Now take a sponge 4 miles square and 500 feet deep with holes in proportion to the little sponge, and you have an illustration of the wonderful wind cave of Custer County, South Dakota. Chapter 11. Wind Cave Continued. Pearly Gates and Blue Grotto Route. A very much longer, more beautiful, and also more difficult journey than the one just described may be taken by those in whom the desire to see is greater than the fear of fatigue or possibly some little danger. With this object in view, the fairgrounds route is followed through Monte Cristo's Palace and into Milliners Avenue. Here we leave it by dropping off the bridge into a rough hole, which proves to be a passage descending into Castle Garden directly beneath the avenue, and a room of considerable size, plentifully supplied with boulders. Although interesting to visit, it has no points of such special merit as would seem to require a detailed account, the main importance attaching to it being the fact that it is the first portion of the 8th level visited. A little beyond, however, is something quite new. The floor is covered with a light yellow crust of calcite crystal, sufficiently strong to bear the weight of a limited number of guests without much fracture. It generally gives a hollow sound when struck, which is easily accounted for, as there are small holes noticed by which steam evidently made its escape, and through these cavities can be seen, but they are shallow. One place shows the crust broken up and with the edges of the pieces overlapped, like ice broken by a sudden rise of backwater, and in this position they have been firmly cemented. This is where the slowly receding waters of the cave lingered in shallow pools above the small crevices long after the main portions had become dry. That the crust was formed on top of the water instead of beneath its surface has been proved by the only body of water now standing in the cave. This is called Silent Lake, and being situated on another route will be described in its proper place. But when discovered, no water was visible, nor its presence even suspected, until the crust gave way under the weight of an explorer. The thin sheet of yellow calcite crystal thus broken was the same as that seen in great abundance in the now perfectly dry 8th level. The gradually decreasing volume of water has left a smooth yellow coat on portions of the walls where irregularities or slopes were favorable, and at least one such place is vividly remembered if once seen. A steep incline of about 15 feet leads to a small oval hole through the wall. Towards this we crawled with no great ease, but getting to the hole was far easier than going through it into a tiny cubby not high enough to sit comfortably upright in, and too small to permit an average-sized human being to turn around. Close on the left it is shut in by another wall pierced by 2 holes similar to that just passed, and each revealing a miniature chamber scarcely more than 3 feet in either direction and 18 inches high. Being directed to examine the ceiling of the first, it was done with some difficulty and much satisfaction, for there in the center was a most exquisite bit of artwork, a circular disc of druzy quartz about 12 inches in diameter and having the appearance of a flat rosette of fine black lace in open pattern with small diamonds thickly strung on every thread, a brilliant sparkling mass of gems. After Mr. MacDonald had carefully removed a geode from the other little chamber, he slid down into a 4th, the last of the diminutive suite, having sufficient height to allow a sitting posture with raised head, and opened the small jewel case while I examined the place it came from. Here all was calcite crystal heavily massed in various forms, and a harmony of blue and brown, with 6 round, unbroken, perfect geodes hanging from the ceiling like oriole nests. The geode taken proved on opening to be especially fine, being filled with pearly white calcite crystals of both the dog-tooth and nail-head forms, and was kindly presented to be added to the collection of cave specimens already purchased in town, to which were also added handsome pieces of druzy quartz, cave coral, and tufa and mineral wool. Following the guide, I now slipped down into the larger nook just vacated, and saw with considerable chagrin that the next step was down a perpendicular wall more than 10 feet in height, facing a high, narrow fissure, the floor of which was merely 2 shelves sloping to an open space along the middle, almost 2 feet wide, with the darkness of continuing crevice below. Further progress seemed absolutely impossible. All things are, however, possible to those who will, and it had been willed to pay a visit to the grandest portion of Wind Cave. In order to do so, the descent must be made, and was. Then some little distance must be traveled along the crevice, but the angle of elevation taken by both sides of the bisected floor served as a sort of prohibitory tax, together with the calcite paving, since to maintain an upright position on such a surface would require long training of a certain professional character. That difficulty, too, was overcome by placing a foot on either side of the open crevice, the first consideration, of course, being safety and not grace. We now came to the enjoyment of the reward of merit. Flooded with the brilliant white light of magnesium ribbon, the crevice walls could be seen drawing together at a height of 65 feet, and both composed entirely of larger boxwork than any seen before, and very heavily covered with calcite crystal, colored a bright electric blue and glowing with a pearly luster. This is the Centennial Gallery, and leaving it with reluctance, we passed on into the Blue Grotto to find it finer still. It is somewhat wider and higher, while even the extremely rough, uneven floor shows no spot bare of the heavy boxwork of a yet deeper blue. The wonderful beauty of this Blue Grotto necessarily stands beyond comparison, because in all the known world there is nothing like it. The forms of crystal are chiefly aragonite. From here we passed to the Chamber de Norquet, which would be considered a very handsome room if it had no superiors, and the same can be said of Union College, in which, however, is the Fan Rock to claim special notice, an immense piece of fallen boxwork shaped like a lady's fan half opened. An imposing vestibule leads into the extensive but rather dreary catacombs, from which we crawled through a little hole into the MWA Hall, emerging at the top of a steep but not high slope covered with the smooth yellow crust of calcite encountered at other places, and in trying to make a dexterous turn so as to go down feet first, the descent was accomplished with uncalculated suddenness and an unsought but liberal collection of bruises. This, however, was not a happening of the unexpected, and could have no attention amid scenes of wonder and beauty, and we were close to the geysers. From a scientific point of view, this is the most important portion of the cave, for here is an indisputable proof that the water in the cave was hot and that it was subject to geyser action. The surrounding region is covered with the crust already described, and at the top of a gentle elevation is thrown up in the unmistakable form of geyser cones, there being two near together on the surface described, with a third visible through one of these on a slightly lower level, this one being a new discovery, as it had escaped observation until we called attention to it. These small cones show that, after the degree of heat and the volume of water had become reduced to the merest fraction of their former greatness, they continued their accustomed work here in the depth of the earth long after the once grand old geyser had ceased to show an outward sign of life. When the water finally became so reduced even here that the steam could no longer force it through, or to these latest vents, The last rising vapors fringed their edges with a beautiful snow-white border of crystallized carbonate of lime, as fine and soft as a band of swan's down, which it resembles. In the pure, still atmosphere of the 8th level, almost 500 feet beneath the entrance, this silent proof of ancient action will endure for the admiration and instruction of many generations yet to come. Few mortals will ever be honored with memorials so lasting or so convincing of vanished power. Proceeding on the journey, the next chamber is the AOUW Hall, a large irregular room, by the rise of which a return to the 7th level is accomplished, and the next entered is the tabernacle, not at all resembling the last, although a similar description would be correct. Now is reached what many consider the cave's greatest charm, the pearly gates, and marvelously beautiful it certainly is. Approaching by a slightly lower level, we see a gateway opening between large rocks that light up with the soft luster and varied tints of mammoth pearls. A wonderful effect is produced by the white calcite crystal spread in unequal thickness over the dark surface of the encrusted rocks. Just without the gate is a short but not golden stairway leading to it, and immediately within is the Saint's Rest, a chamber of moderate size, beautified by another great rock on which are combined the warm pearly glow of calcite and the cold glitter of frost by the later addition of lime carbonate vapor crystals to the calcium carbonate aragonite. Next beyond is the chamber containing the standing rock behind which Mr. Johnstone made his famous discovery of the concealed pinhead. It is an immense great fallen rock on whose dark surface are scattered transparent flake-like crystals of satin spar, resembling the congealed drops of a summer shower. The mind-reader entered the chamber by the way we shall leave it. Returning to the spot from which the pearly gates were first viewed, we stand facing the most beautiful of this imposing group of brilliant scenes, the Mermaid's Resort. This is a small cove with wave marks in the white beach sand, above which rises a projecting, sheltering cliff as purely white as freshly fallen snow, with a fine deposit of frostwork in thick moss-like patterns, 2 and 3 inches deep. This crystalline mass, so white and fragile, has to perfection the appearance of hoarfrost about a steam vent in extremely cold weather, and was, no doubt, formed in a somewhat similar manner. It is crystallized carbonate of lime, and could have been deposited in such extremely delicate forms only by the heavily charged vapors rising from hot water. No one needs to be told that hot water will take and hold in solution a much larger quantity of solid matter than is possible to cold water, with all other conditions the same. Nor is it news that a portion of the solid substance is carried off in the rising steam. Now the geyser cones, so recently visited on the next lower level, prove both the heat of the water and its heavy charge of solids, which gave it a far more intense heat than pure water could have equaled, and this in turn drove the steam to greater distances than otherwise it would have reached. When cooled to such a point as to be reduced to a light vapor, its movement was checked by various walls, projections, and ceiling as were in its upward path, and these received the minute particles of burden, while the somewhat brisk motion of the atmosphere, occasioned at these points by the mixing of that of higher temperature from below with the lower from above, is responsible for the dainty and varied forms assumed by the fragile structure. Once more resuming the journey, we admire the rugged charms of University Heights, a somewhat larger and higher room than the next, St. Dominic's Chamber, but perhaps not more interesting than the Council Chamber, which besides other attractions is to some extent also a statuary hall. From the Council Chamber, the Alpine Way leads up into the fairgrounds directly above. This Alpine Way is a sort of corkscrew twisting through the rocks, not unlike a badly walled well, assisted at the lowest portion by a short and nearly perpendicular ladder. Next is the Assembly Room, or Crown Chamber, as it is also called on account of a handsome crown conspicuously placed. This room also contains a moose so perfectly carved that the skeptic who searches diligently for imperfections finally clamors for the whole company to celebrate his discovery of the artist's noble skill. Leaving this room, we re-enter Milliners Avenue and soon cross the bridge from which, a few hours ago, we descended into the 8th level by way of Castle Garden, and now the return to the surface is by the route followed before, and we arrive there at last terribly weary, but more than well pleased. Stay tuned for the next segment from Cave Regions of the Ozarks and Black Hills by Luella Agnes Owen. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Vanzaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.